Welcome. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of The Shadows by George MacDonald. When we last left our friend Ralph Wrinkleman, a human who had been made king of fairyland as he hovered between life and death, the shadows had come to visit Ralph. They had invited him to come with them to church. As you listen, feel free to close your eyes and relax. Or, of course, you can watch the shadows play on the screen. Here we go. All our brothers and sisters will be at church now before going to their night's work. Do they always go to church before they go to work? They always go to church first. Where is the church? In Iceland. Would your majesty like to see it? How can I go and see it when, as you know very well, I am ill in bed? Besides, I should be sure to take cold in a frosty night like this, even if I put on the blankets and took the feather bed for a muff. A sort of quivering passed over their faces, which seemed to be their mode of laughing. The whole shape of the face shook and fluctuated, as if it had been some dark fluid, till by slow degrees of gathering calm it settled into its former rest. Then one of them drew aside the curtains of the bed, and the window curtains not having been yet drawn, the king beheld the white glimmering night outside, struggling with the heaps of darkness that tried to quench it, and the heavens full of stars, flashing and sparkling like live jewels. The other shadow went towards the fire and vanished in it. Scores of shadows immediately began an insane dance all about the room, disappearing one after the other through the uncovered window and gliding darkly away over the face of the white snow, for the window looked at once on a field of snow. In a few moments the room was quite cleared of them, but instead of being relieved by their absence, the king felt immediately as if he were in a dead house and could hardly breathe for the sense of emptiness and desolation that fell upon him. But as he lay looking out on the snow, which stretched blank and wide before him, he spied in the distance a long dark line which drew nearer and nearer, and showed itself at last to be all the shadows, walking in a double row and carrying in the midst of them something like a bier. They vanished under the window, but soon reappeared, having somehow climbed up the wall of the house, for they entered in perfect order by the window, as if melting through the transparency of the glass. They still carried the bier or litter. It was covered with richest furs and skins of gorgeous wild beasts whose eyes were replaced by sapphires and emeralds that glittered and gleamed in the fire and snow light. The outermost skins sparkled with frost, but the inside ones were soft and warm and dry as the down under a swan's wing. The shadows approached the bed and set the litter upon it. Then a number of them brought a huge fur robe, and wrapping it round the king, laid him on the litter in the midst of the furs. Nothing could be more gentle and respectful than the way in which they moved him, and he never thought of refusing to go. Then they put something on his head, and, lifting the litter, carried him once round the room to fall into order As he passed the mirror, he saw that he was covered with royal ermine, and that his head wore a wonderful crown of gold set with none but red stones, rubies and carbuncles and garnets, and others whose names he could not tell glowed gloriously around his head, like the salamandrine essence of all the Christmas fires over the world. A scepter lay beside him, a rod of ebony surmounted by a cone-shaped diamond, which, cut in 100 facets, flashed all the hues of the rainbow and threw colored gleams on every side that looked like shadows too, but more ethereal than those that bore him. Then the shadows rose gently to the window, passed through it, and, sinking slowly upon the field of outstretched snow, commenced an orderly gliding rather than march along the frozen surface. They took it by turns to bear the king, as they sped with the swiftness of thought in a straight line towards the north. The pole star rose above their heads with visible rapidity, for indeed they moved quite as fast as sad thoughts, though not with all the speed of happy desires. England and Scotland slid past the litter of the King of the Shadows. Over rivers and lakes they skimmed and glided. They climbed the high mountains and crossed the valleys with a fearless bound, till they came to John o' Groat's house and the northern sea. The sea was not frozen, for all the stars shone as clear out of the deeps below as they shone out of the deeps above, and as the bearers slid along the blue-gray surface, with never a furrow in their track, so pure was the water beneath, that the king saw neither surface, bottom, nor substance to it, but seemed to be gliding only through the blue sphere of heaven, with the stars above him and the stars below him, and between the stars and him nothing but an emptiness where, for the first time in his life, his soul felt that it had room enough. At length they reached the rocky shores of Iceland. There they landed, still pursuing their journey. All this time the king felt no cold, for the red stones in his crown kept him warm, and the emerald and sapphire eyes of the wild beasts kept the frosts from settling upon his litter. Oftentimes upon their way they had to pass through forests, caverns, and rock-shadowed paths, where it was so dark that at first the king feared he should lose his shadows altogether. But as soon as they entered such places, the diamond in his scepter began to shine and glow and flash, sending out streams of light, all the colors that the painter's soul could dream of, in which light the shadows grew livelier and stronger than ever, speeding through the dark ways with an all but blinding swiftness. In the light of the diamond, too, some of their forms became more simple and human, while others seemed only to break out into a yet more untamable absurdity. Once, as they passed through a cave, the king actually saw some of their eyes, strange shadow eyes. He had never seen any of their eyes before. But at the same moment when he saw their eyes, he knew their faces too, for they turned them full upon him for an instant, and the other shadows, catching sight of these, shrank and shivered and nearly vanished. Lovely faces they were, but the king was very thoughtful after he saw them, and continued rather troubled all the rest of the journey. He could not account for those faces being there, and the faces of shadows, too, with living eyes. But he soon found that amongst the shadows a man must learn never to be surprised at anything, for if he does not, he will soon grow quite stupid in consequence of the endless recurrence of surprises. At last they climbed up the bed of a little stream, and then, passing through a narrow rocky defile, came out suddenly upon the side of a mountain, overlooking a blue frozen lake in the very heart of mighty hills. Overhead the aurora borealis was shivering and flashing like a battle of 10,000 spears. Underneath, its beams passed faintly over the blue ice and the sides of the snow-clad mountains, whose tops shot up like huge icicles all about, with here and there a star sparkling on the very tip of one. But as the northern lights in the sky above so wavered and quivered and shot hither and thither, the shadows on the surface of the lake below, now gathering in groups and now shivering asunder, now covering the whole surface of the lake, and anon condensed into one dark knot in the center. Every here and there on the white mountains might be seen 2 or 3 shooting away towards the tops to vanish beyond them, so that their number was gradually, though not visibly, diminishing. "Please, your majesty," said the shadows, "this is our church, the church of the shadows." And so saying, the king's bodyguard set down the litter upon a rock and plunged into the multitudes below. They soon returned, however, and bore the king down into the middle of the lake. All the shadows came crowding round him, respectfully but fearlessly, and sure never such a grotesque assembly revealed itself before to mortal eyes. The king had seen all kinds of gnomes, goblins, and kobolds at his coronation, but they were quite rectilinear figures compared with the insane lawlessness of form in which the shadows rejoiced. And the wildest gambols of the former were orderly dances of ceremony beside the apparently aimless and wilful contortions of figure and metamorphoses of shape in which the latter indulged. They retained, however, all the time, to the surprise of the king, an identity, each of his own type, inexplicably perceptible through every change. Indeed, this preservation of the primary idea of each form was more wonderful than the bewildering and ridiculous alterations to which the form itself was at every moment subjected. "What are you?" said the king, leaning on his elbow and looking around him. "The shadows, your majesty," answered several voices at once. "What shadows?" "The human shadows, the shadows of men and women and their children." "Are you not the shadows of chairs and tables and pokers and tongs just as well?" At this question, a strange jarring commotion went through the assembly with a shock. Several of the figures shot up as high as the aurora, but instantly settled down again to human size, as if overmastering their feelings out of respect to him who had roused them. One who had bounded to the highest visible icy peak, and as suddenly returned, now elbowed his way through the rest, and made himself spokesman for them during the remaining part of the dialogue. "Excuse our agitation, your majesty," said he. "I see your majesty has not yet thought proper to make himself acquainted with our nature and habits." "I wish to do so now," replied the king. "We are the shadows," repeated the shadows solemnly. "Well," said the king. "We do not often appear to men." "Huh," said the king. "We do not belong to the sunshine at all. We go through it unseen, and only by a passing chill do men recognize an unknown presence." "Huh," said the king again. "It is only in the twilight of the fire, or when one man or woman is alone with a single candle, or when any number of people are all feeling the same thing at once, making them one, that we show ourselves and the truth of things." "Can that be true that loves the night?" said the king. "The darkness is true which mocks at forms, said the king. Truth rides abroad in shapeless storms, answered the shadow. Ha, thought Ralph Rinkelmann, it rhymes. The shadow caps my questions with his answers, very strange, and he grew thoughtful again. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll listen again next time as we continue the shadow conversation with Ralph Rinkelmann. Until then,